This month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by Allison Cook, Lindsay Trebet, and Super Inframan. If you'd like to help support the show, you can do so at wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Soraya.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight I have part two of the conversation with Cherylee Black and David Metcalfe. If you're a patron, you already got this part, but if you're not, here's part two. And afterwards, since this doesn't take up the whole length of the show, I have some other stuff to finish us out. But for right now, here's Cherylee and David talking about psi and research and all kinds of interesting stuff.
So what about the Monroe Institute? Is it tied to theosophy? Or?
No, that's one of the cool things about the Monroe Institute was Robert Monroe had his experiences. And he went straight from the experience to experiment. And they've developed their own kind of mythopoesis and narrative around what that means. If you've read the books, like there's a lot of numbers and different states of consciousness and that kind of thing. But he really focused, and the people that worked with him really focused on going direct from experience and experiment to, okay, what does that mean? As opposed to, let's go and like read a whole bunch of older books on what this means and kind of weave a narrative. Like Robert Monroe never talks about Atlantis or, Lemuria or, the root races or, we're building a new psychic being or, there's no messianic kind of concepts to it. So that's actually something I really like about Robert Monroe is that in his work, there are kind of cultic aspects because he made an institute and, people kind of formed around the books that he wrote. But, and he, a cult of personality kind of thing because he was such a strong character. But it's very down to earth and direct from like experience to doing, and doesn't have a lot of the kind of the overlay around it, He didn't seem like he was trying to build a new world or anything like that. It was very much direct, kind of have these experiences, and then from that you'll be able to see what it means,
Yeah. Well, I know some, like Esalen has tried to stay away from becoming a religion, and they've really had to work at it.
Well, and so Esalen's an interesting example because Michael Murphy actually was inspired by Sri Aurobindo. Right. So they do have an underlying metaphysics, which is a kind of Gnostic evolution theory where, and that plays a strong part into why they have the physical culture. One of the interesting things about Esalen is it has real strong focus on physical culture. If you look at, is it George Leonard? George Leonard's work, which kind of mixes Aikido with some energy work practices and that, comes out of early 20th century physical culture, which we now think of as yoga, but a lot of it was like these Swedish military practices. It has a strong tie to that culture, which was really big with some of the popular gurus that were teaching yoga to rich people on the West Coast and East Coast. And it was tied to this, be healthy, get your breathing right and all of that. So these yogic practices of pranayama and that kind of thing, but then brought into the United States as this is how you feel better and, more what Americans would want to hear, and Esalen comes out of that culture to a certain extent because Michael Murphy's experiences with Sri Aurobindo led to him founding this institute to, kind of herald a different way of thinking and a different way of living. It's very much an experiment in a new way of thinking, but directly tied to Sri Aurobindo, who's a a guru, you know.
It's really interesting because, my understanding was that they had tried to steer away from anything religious. But I think anytime you're looking at spiritual, again, I know people say I'm spiritual and not religious, but it's hard. They kind of overlap a little bit sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, and so one of the things I learned with looking at Santa Muerta, the Saint Death devotional tradition, you really get to see how much charismatic individual.
Uh-oh.
You get these little tiny pyramids all over the place where you have somebody who has a very strong experience or relationship with Santa Muerta or talks a good game, and they develop these small cults around them, and then on the periphery of that, you have people that just kind of pick it up and read what they read and are influenced by books and authors and that. But it really, these individuals, and that's kind of, Robert Monroe, Ezelin in and of itself has kind of developed that charisma about it, because there's been, throughout its history, there's been different people who've come in. And, one of the things that Michael Murphy and I forget the other co-founder's name, they wanted to kind of bring all these different thinkers together and see what happened. So you would get these, like, this wild mix of scientists and musicians and Robert Anton Wilson hung out there for a while and was giving lectures and talks, while at the same time you had, Ezelin helped with some of the citizen diplomacy with the Soviet Union, so you had Gorbachev there and that kind of thing. So imagine that situation where you've got 1 week you've got Robert Anton Wilson, there talking about his theories, and maybe logic and that kind of stuff. And then, a month later, Gorbachev is there, and there's high level citizen diplomacy discussions going. And then after that, you've got like Gestalt therapy, so just like an interesting kind of mix of different influences, but it all kind of flowed around strong personalities that were able to hold that together, and that's kind of the thing with parapsychology. There's a lot of unnamed researchers that do the research and stuff, and then there's the more public kind of like superstars that people know about and may even be kind of media figures,
Yeah, like I know there's one parapsychologist that I'm kind of thinking of that it's like he has two streams of work. What he actually gets peer-reviewed and published in parapsychology is quite different from what he does presentations on
Right.
to raise money for his work.
Right.
And I think that, originally he actually tried to do some of the less than scientific studies and he had them published and was rightfully critiqued by some fairly well-named parapsychologists.
Right.
And so then he started kind of dividing his work between what would pass peer review and not be criticized, and what looked really good for these afterlife conferences where
Right.
you get like the afterlife tourism kind of thing, where people are giving him money to further this work that's not necessarily as scientific as he's leading them to believe it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's aspects of that really bother me. Because I got kind of caught up in some of that at one point, and then I said, this isn't scientific work. And then I got then I got the appeal or the argument from authority. Well, I have a PhD and you don't, so
Right. Yeah, I decide what's scientific. Yeah.
yeah. So I know what's scientific better than you do, and that was kind of where I ended that relationship.
Yeah, that's and it's kind of a devil's bargain too, because the media and the kind of like popular culture will never gratify, I think, in the way that the people, unless they're just looking for money, and to sell a product, they, it's not going to have the same, it always gets watered down. It always gets corrupted in some sense, and it's, for a scientist, it's really, it really hurts the work and anything they could actually gain out of it,
Yeah. Well, and I think, like sometimes you will get groups that get together with a lot of enthusiasm and will sometimes have some really tremendous experiences, like, like the stuff that the school group did.
Yeah.
And it's like they kind of, I know the official story is now that it was like time travelers or aliens or something told them to stop the work when they stopped it for a period of time.
What is this?
Oh, the Skull Group?
Oh, Skull. Okay, I think you said school.
No.
And I was like, wait, what?
No, the Skull Group. Which was, and of course, just the way it ended made people go, oh yeah, they were about to get caught, so they,
Right.
So they came up with a stupid reason and stopped it. But I don't really think that was the case. I just think that it's like just when you start getting really cool stuff happening, and they had like good scientists there witnessing these things and writing reports on it. It's almost like after a while, something just has to come to mess it up. It's like the phenomenon itself does this.
Yeah, well, that the Phillips experiment, up in Toronto, the Phillips experiment with manifesting a poltergeist.
Yeah, table tipping. Yeah.
Yeah, mm-hmm. And they started getting more results, and it kind of petered out and everything. And I know somebody who has talked to one of the scientists that was involved in that. And at this point, the guy like kind of doesn't even want to talk or touch anything that has to do with it. And not out of a like we were hoaxing and now we couldn't carry it that long, but more of like, no, I kind of got scared and I don't want to do this anymore, and things got weird, and let's not talk about it. And I think with the skull experiment, as SORAT is another example of that, where SORAT did have some kind of funky play going on there, but there was also phenomena.
What was that?
SORAT was another sitting group that developed poltergeist phenomena and apports. It was another kind of sitting seance group.
Okay.
Man, I'm forgetting the guy's name, but there was a recent book about it. He was George Hansen sat in on some of the SORAT research. But there's another fellow who was a really nice guy, and I forget his name. But he has a book out. I think if you type in SORAT, his book will probably pop up because it just came out within the last couple of years. But I think it's Jim McLean, maybe his name.
That sounds familiar.
But yeah.
How is SORAT spelled?
SORRAT. It's an acronym. And that's the other interesting thing, too, with these sitting groups and the seance groups that are trying to build phenomena and get poltergeist effect supports and manifestation if they can. A lot of times you get this weird kind of, time travelers or aliens or, spirit entities that aren't human kind of narratives that float around that stuff after a while. Even the EVP folks. The transcommunication, one of the groups involved in transcommunication started going on this idea that they were all reincarnated Egyptian high priests that came from Atlantis that had come back together to complete the machine that would connect us to the realm of the dead. And it started out just, random people looking at EVP, getting together. And then as they kept doing the experiments, this narrative developed, and you see that in some of the Tibetan Buddhist stuff too, where when unprepared people go into it, especially in a Western context, the idea of reincarnation and relearning your past and connecting to your lineage, and that starts to develop these kind of strange narratives about, oh, I knew you in like 14th century France, you know, and you were my master then, and now you're my master again, kind of thing, which may be true and it may not, but a lot of times that when it butts up against, you know, everybody else, it kind of gets weird, you know. By everybody else, I mean just everyday reality. When you go to the grocery store, you know, it doesn't kind of blend with the status quo narrative. Shannon Taggart's actually, I think, got some work coming out with the skull experiment stuff, because I think they started up again. I think they were I think they were just doing it more under the radar and less publicly.
So why do you think things turn that way? Why does it become so weird rather than more grounded?
I mean, think like the synchronicities and everything. If you're not real neutral about it, it starts to tell a story. You know, it's like it's kind of like the targeted individual thing, right? Like if people start thinking that people are looking after them, and then they start researching people that think that people are looking after them, and then they start getting paranoid that their computer's tapped, and then a synchronicity happens and they think that somebody planted it, and that paranoia starts to develop, you know? So depending on which way you aim that kind of tendency of pattern seeking, you know, if you start to build a narrative of meaning, and you start to have these synchronicities like, oh, I just found this book on Atlantis, and oh, we're doing these EVP experiments, and oh, wait, you just saw a TV show on Atlantis? Oh, okay, like, you know, maybe that's connected. And then, you know, these narratives start to build. When you get a group of people, you know, it starts to kind of build in on itself, you know. Or individuals, you know, like you think of like Rocky Erickson when he was stealing other people's mail because the aliens were giving the message through the other people's mail. So he had to go to his neighbors and like steal their mail to get the message that the aliens were giving him. Right. You know, so depending on what, and then for whatever reason that was confirmed to him, you know, and what he saw in the meaning there was real, you know. Maybe they were. Maybe he was getting some sweet downloads. I don't know, but good music came out of it, you know. So I don't know, but
I mean, why doesn't this stuff ever take a more grounded method? I guess is what I'm saying, or maybe it does, and we just don't notice because it's more grounded.
Yeah, I think, you know, so I mentioned Mark Stavish earlier, and he has a joke where all of the practitioners that he knows wear suits and dress nicely, you know, which is to say that they hold day jobs and they don't talk about it, and they go home and they do their ritual work and they do their practice, and then they go to work the next day. And I think those are the people that aren't on chat rooms and aren't really, you know, they have their group or they have their whatever and they're just doing it. It's different kind of with the psychic research stuff because you're actually doing research, you know, and so there's institutions that are doing this research, and if you have the experience, you go to participate in that, and then if they're more public, then you become more public, you know, and so that kind of drags it out of that sort of thing. But if you think about the remote viewing work that was done at SRI, and then after that through the different programs, there's a lot of folks that were involved in that don't go public and don't really talk about it publicly, you know. I was even surprised recently to realize how many remote viewing services were being offered by different groups and by different individuals at a level where they had like an LLC that was offering services, but they just weren't really public about it, and they weren't really writing about it, you know. Like if you knew somebody who knew somebody, you might hire them. But it wasn't something that was really out in the open, you know. Not that it was hidden, it just wasn't, you know, they weren't making a big deal. They weren't getting newspaper articles or, you know, doing that kind of thing. So,
yeah.
Now with go ahead, Cherylee.
Well, no, I was just going to say that like Joe McMonigal mentioned that they had to be careful, though, who that they brought into remote viewing, that some people had, you know, basically psychological breakdowns.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and that after a while they kind of learned to see who was able to be grounded enough to do it.
Yeah, and that's...
You know, and I was going to say, like, anyone who does kind of psychic stuff, that's one of the first things that you kind of need to learn is how to ground yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, you know, like you, Joe McMoneagle is an incredibly grounded guy. You know, yeah. I mean, he's one of the calmest human beings that I've ever encountered. A super nice guy. You know, and so I think it's just, yeah, it's that psychological makeup in the beginning. If it clicks wrong, you know, when you start to have phenomena occur, it can really set that off in a bad way.
Well, and like you joke that I'm normal. You know, I'm really quite boring.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, and that's the thing too. You know, it's not like a comic book. You know, like, and that's the, you know.
It's not like superpowers.
Yeah, well, it is. I mean, Cherylee, you're the Russian chosen one. You know, but at the same time, you know. At the same time, you're a grounded human being, you know, that's not, I don't know. I just look at one of the, you know, and I don't even feel bad about saying the name of it, but the Farsight Institute is a lot of craziness with remote viewing, you know.
How so?
Well, they're the ones that were claiming what Hale-Bopp was.
Yeah,
like, that was the whole thing that set off the cult that killed themselves.
Yeah, they were one of the ones that said that they had remote viewed Hale-Bopp, and that they pulled back off that, like after the, you know, the Heaven's Gate suicide stuff. But, you know, now they're doing stuff where they've like, in McMoneagle's book, on time travel, he does a remote viewing of the crucifixion. But he couches it in kind of like, this is a remote viewing experiment. Whereas the Farsight Institute makes a documentary that they put up on YouTube, which is like, no, we remote viewed the crucifixion and this is what happened. And guess what happened in Atlantis? And it's like, you know, that's not, even if you got that information, like that's not the way to present. I don't know. It's a weird way to go about it.
And of course, with anything like remote viewing that we can't verify in any way, we have no idea where the brain is pulling that from. Like, was it McMoneagle who suggested that it was precognition, that they were, because they were seeing the data later, they were able to remote view it?
He's worked a lot with Ed May, and that's Ed May's idea. Yeah, so that definitely, and some of the experimental results definitely look that way. Where, you know, remote viewing experiments where they were doing the feedback, the remote viewing was much closer to what the feedback was going to give them than it was where the actual thing was that they were trying to remote view.
Although they did have examples where Pat Price saw things that weren't confirmed until after his death.
That's actually, there's a really interesting thing. Eric Wargo is writing an article that he's going to publish in the SSE about that. There's some interesting stuff with that one too. That looks more in terms of precognitive to the feedback than the actual site itself. There's a really interesting backstory to that, which if Eric wasn't going to publish his paper, I would go into, but we'll have to wait for the publication. But yeah, there's an interesting story there with that one.
So that begs the question, like, does it feel different to them when they're remote viewing something they're not going to be able to get any kind of feedback on?
I don't know. I mean, you know, it's kind of interesting. I was just thinking about, you know, Jeff Kripal wrote a book about a near-death experiencer who was hit by lightning, and she has these precognitive dreams about like plane crashes, and her images are basically, they look like the images that are shown in the news and in the newspapers after the accidents happen.
Right.
So is she seeing the accident, or is she seeing the media reporting of the accident? Like, it seems like she's seeing the media reporting of the accident even farther into the future than the accident is.
Right, and I think that's what Wargo says in Time Loops, too, that a lot of times people are seeing the media reports. And he cites one case where the guy got the number of people dead wrong based on the actual account, but that it was the initial account posted in the media.
Right. Yeah, and that's where, and I think Ingo Swann made like a clear differentiation between he was doing out-of-body work where he felt that he was traveling somewhere, and versus when he was doing remote viewing, and that was a different modality. And I know
Joe McMonagle,
yeah, he's real careful with that too, in designating this is this modality of psychic functioning, and this is remote viewing, and then this is another one,
But how do you make that distinction?
I think it's definitely a different sensory experience. Like an out-of-body state is way different than the ways that you're getting remote viewing cues.
Okay.
It's hard to describe without doing it.
Yeah,
right,
I don't know.
I would say an out of body, because I've had out of body experiences, and they're almost like a small scale NDE.
Yeah.
That you don't quite see things the way that you see them normally. Like, it's almost like the room kind of curves up on itself, sort of, in a funny way. But remote viewing, because I've tried that too, and that's more like remembering.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's it's like the sensation of it's like remembering something more than it is like experiencing something.
Yeah, it's more of a I don't know, that's yes. And then and channeling's different too, right? Like there's different, it's a physiological difference. Like it feels different, like it's a different sensory input kind of experience depending on what you're doing, But remote viewing's like very, and remote viewing too, in the technical sense, is the protocol itself. So you would know that you're doing remote viewing because you're doing a specific protocol for how to get this psychic information, versus an out-of-body experience, which has a different thing, or a lucid dream even, which has a different, induction method and different protocol for how to get to it.
So when someone is remote viewing the crucifixion, I guess is what I was getting at. Like, does it feel different than when they're remote viewing something they can verify?
That's an interesting question. I would think so. I guess you could maybe. Well, I guess you couldn't because it would still be confirmed later. I was thinking maybe Ingo Swann's remote viewing of Jupiter and the rings of Jupiter, but I think even that was confirmed later through media. Well, it would have to be. I mean, it wasn't like he went to Jupiter, but
right.
So yeah, I guess that still would be in the mediation loop. I don't know. That's an interesting question. Yeah, like remote viewing the past. Like, how does that feel versus?
Yeah, like or remote viewing Atlantis.
Right.
Yeah, but then you have to kind of look at, like, some remote viewers are quite good at knowing when they've got it right, and some can't tell.
Yeah.
Like Joe McMonagle, I think, has a real sense when he's got it.
Yeah.
And I suspect that like the Courtney Brown stuff doesn't seem very accurate in a lot of things. Like,
right.
It really seems more like, I don't know. It's more like a Star Trek club.
Yeah, it's
like play acting.
Yeah.
A group of people, they're play acting and it's fun for them and they get excited about it and they're making up stories. and which is fine, but I don't think that what they're doing is necessarily very accurate, and I don't know that they can tell the difference between a good and accurate thing and just them having kind of a fun go at it.
Right.
I'm trying to be nice.
I know. So you're being very gentle with them. That's very gentle for
it would be like, let's say, say the Psychic Friends Network could probably have real psi experiences, because I think everybody does. Mm-hmm. And that they're probably kind of set it, if you go into something like that, you're probably thinking, if you think it's possible, maybe you'll facilitate an experience just because you're prepped for it. But on the other hand, there's still a lot of fraud and goofiness with it.
Right.
And
well, there's that great Orson Welles clip where he's on a talk show, and he's describing a time when he went, and Orson Welles was very into performance magic, and he was on a beach that had fortune teller setups. And so I don't know if he knew somebody there or what, but he got hooked up with one of these booths and did a mentalist routine, fortune telling routine, which was just cold reading for the day or however long he was doing this. And he describes this experience where, and I think they even made a TV show out of the term, but this idea of what he says the mentalists have this term called a shut-eye, which is where you're doing performance magic, you're doing mentalism, which is a trick, and you're cold reading and you're doing all the tricks to get the information out of the person. And he said that a shut-eye is when you know all the tricks and you're doing all the tricks, and somebody walks in, and before you do anything to them, you call out something that's actually true. And you realize that you didn't get that from a trick, but you actually had a psychic experience. And he said that a lot of mentalists in the trade, in the psychic services trade, will quit at that point because they know that they've gone too far with it. It just weirds them out that they're not cold reading, they're not manipulating the information so that the people are giving them the information, or saying a bland generality that kind of directs somebody to make a choice, but they actually had a psychic experience. And so Orson Welles calls that and claims that it's a trade term of a shut-eye, and that's kind of like the curse of the mentalist, is when they become a shut-eye.
Which takes us back to what we were talking about initially, where you have these researchers who almost seem to want to deny the stuff they're researching. You have a mentalist who has a legitimate experience, and instead of going with it, they turn it down, basically. Yeah.
Charles Tart has a good essay on fear of psi, which I would highly recommend, talking about that tendency to, and it is because it's such it really is a kind of reality rocking experience when you encounter the phenomena in a way that's kind of undeniable.
Yeah, that's a great essay, because when he talks about the different ways that people will react, and even as far as sabotaging their own experiments. And I kind of looked at it like that one experiment I was talking about, where he was blaming everything on temperature changes. Well, why on earth would you come up with an apparatus that was so darn easily influenced by temperature if you're going to sit somebody next to it and blame everything on temperature changes? Clearly you need to set things up differently so that temperature doesn't affect anything.
Or was it that he just didn't believe any of it was going to work deep down, and then when it did, he had to come up with an explanation?
I don't know. I think, I don't know if I should say this, but Nancy had suggested that he was even seeing some of his own abilities on the equipment.
Well, sure. That's the other thing we talked about, that effect.
Well,
and that could scare someone.
Well, and for the scientists too, if you have you get this in academia, and it bleeds out into the professional research culture as well, where there's an us and them kind of attitude.
Yes.
There's the researcher and there's the subject, and never the twain shall meet. And there's a reason that they're different, and the reason isn't simply function. It is that the researcher, like you said earlier, Cherylee, like the idea that the one parapsychologist you were talking about had a PhD, right? And so there's this very strong institutional culture of degrees and authority and that kind of thing. And there's a certain element in some of this stuff where, and I see this taking it out of the parapsychology thing with the Santa Muerta research, where, Santa Muerta, there's European scholars that are studying Santa Muerta, and to them, like, Mexico is so far away. It's the U.S. scholars are better at it, but there's still kind of an othering, where this is something that's in Mexico and this is in Latin American communities, and this is, there's this kind of otherness to it, and there's a real sense of I don't know, like that were the researcher to become the thing that they were studying, it's almost revolting to them, And it's just kind of a weird cultural thing that exists in academia when people start studying this stuff, the idea that it would actually touch them, and it's not in a book. I know that I had that because I've had experiences all my life, but when I got into college, I was doing comparative religion and cognitive philosophy, and all of this, all of my own experiences were compartmentalized. And I was looking at everything through, books and terminology and, very regimented kind of looking at it. And at the point in my life where my own experiences and what I was studying clashed, where they hit, and where I had to admit, like, okay, this isn't just in a book and this isn't just some curiosity or something, but this is actually real, and I'm experiencing it too, and it's affecting my life and affecting, who I am. It was a really jarring experience, The same thing with the Santa Muerta stuff is in doing the research. I live in rural Georgia, so the kind of like displaced communities or whatever term that are used to kind of describe poor people, like living their lives and they have this devotion to Saint Death. That's my neighbors, like to a certain extent. So it's not this otherness to me, so it's, I think with the parapsychologists and with anybody studying the psi stuff, the psychic is always other. And the second that bridge is crossed, and the researcher has to realize, oh, wait a second, if this person's doing this and now I'm starting to see it and it's happening to me too, I'm the other as well. It's a weird psychological moment.
Well, that makes sense, I guess.
Yeah, although there are some cases with parapsychologists where they get, I guess, what's the phrase? They go native?
Yeah, that's it. Well, yeah, and see, there's even a term for it, and that's, and those are the ones I like. I like the ones that go native,
Yeah, although in some cases, some of them, I think, lose their way in terms of, scientific integrity. I've seen that.
That's true. Yeah, well, that's where the cult stuff comes in, and that's where the cult sneaks around the corner there. As you're crossing the native boundary. Like George Hansen warned me about that a long time ago. He was like, "You got to be careful about crossing that enchanted boundary, because once you cross that enchanted boundary, things get weird, and your objectivity gets questionable." Yeah,
because I dealt with one researcher who had clearly crossed that line, and he was trying to drag me over it too, because I was trying to fight for better scientific controls, because like we were having very spontaneous experiences just through our correspondence and Skype conversations. And he didn't want to rein that in by putting proper controls on things, to the point where he was clearly trying to feed me information so that the experiences wouldn't stop. You know what I mean? Like, instead of saying, wow, that was a really interesting experience, let's see if we can do this in a more controlled setting. He was, that was a great experience. Now promise me you won't look on this website that will give you the answer to my question. And now try and use your magic powers to answer my question. But promise you won't look. And you're laughing, but it was absolutely that bad. It was absolutely that bad. And his answer for that was that he was going to give me a lie detector test, and that would fix the experiment. That would be the control.
Oh boy!
But then he was going to show me how to
how to calm yourself.
To cheat on one of those. So because anyone can pass one of those. Those tests really aren't that good. But it'll make it all look like really like that was the kind of back and forth. And I was just horrified, and I was like, no. And then he got angry because I stopped responding to emails, and I wouldn't answer Skype, and I just kind of avoided him. And so then he would get my friends of friends to kind of send me emails. Are you all right? Are you alive? Do you think something terrible's happened to you? I'm like, no, he knows I'm fine. I'm just not answering him. And it was really kind of a frustrating experience because, because as soon as you say, no, I'm not going to take a lie detector test to fix your experiment, I'd rather we just put good experimental controls in place. Then, you can't get away with saying that, because then you're like, oh, she won't take a lie detector test. And, so it's like you're screwed when you deal with somebody like that who thinks that that's how they're going to run a scientific experiment. And it was so bad, I actually sent a copy of all the, I even had recorded Skype calls. I sent the copy to a parapsychologist that I respected and said, in case this is he ever tries to use this against me because I opted out of what he was doing. So you've got all the material so people can make their own minds up as to what was going on here. Because it seemed to me pretty much like, it's like it was obvious trying to steer me towards the answers, which I didn't want.
Well, that's been one of the cool things to see with your work, though, is that you are you want to stick to the science. The experiences happen, but the science is separate. And how to create the controlled experiment that can measure, and start to get an idea of what's going on. And I think that's super important in terms of, and I think that's where the staunch roles is a good thing, just not when it becomes like a weird kind of power dynamic,
Yeah.
Because the Windbridge Institute is very, very keen on that too, because they work with mediumship, and it's been really hard to figure out mediumship controls, and so they do triple blind testing, and they've established, and they do a lot of distance stuff as well, because it does cut out the cold reading and that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I've read Julie Baichel's work, and I think that they do quite a good job there.
Well, and they're so focused on that too, and because of the cultic aspects that kind of float around this stuff, they're very careful in how they talk about their research. Because they never want it to be, a reason to paint them as that they're falling into some kind of subcultural, belief system or something.
sorry, am I still there?
Yeah,
Yeah, you're still there.
I dropped my laptop.
Oh no.
Oh,
That's not a controlled setting. That's not a very controlled setting.
well, we've been going for a while. Should we bring it to a close? Is there anything else we should bring up in this?
I think more people should jump into it and start using the ESP apps and getting themselves a psi wheel and trying it for themselves. You know.
Yeah, I would agree with David there. I think that that's kind of the better way to go about it, because like he understands I've got some frustration dealing with scientists. I mean, there's been some good work done, and the better the work, the quieter they seem to be about it.
Yeah.
Like there's one researcher that I did some stuff with that if he's successful, I could see that being a Nobel Prize winning experiment, but it's very, very quiet right now.
Why do you think?
In that case, I think it has a lot to do with the university he is with is not happy about him being involved with this research.
Oh.
Now, he is a professor emeritus, so he can kind of do what he wants. But as it is, like the university he was at actually turned down a big busload of funding to build some brand new, really cool high-tech equipment at their university, because they didn't want to be associated with anything that might be spooky.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So it's being done at a lab in Germany instead.
Wow.
Yeah. Like what kind of an idiot university turns down?
Yeah, I know, that's the last thing that it's funny, since I work at a university, like that's an amazing, that had to be such an incredible conversation with the administration, like we've got this amount of money that we could get, and if this works out, it could be a huge thing, but we don't want to do anything spooky and embarrass ourselves. So what do we do?
Yeah.
I don't know. Honest science?
Yeah, you'd think.
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of sad. So, I think that, I don't know, I really like seeing people just do their own experiments and have their own experiences and not look for some special person to show up and give them an experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, if these apps help, I mean, I know Tim Renner had quite a few experiences with the, what is it, Randonautica?
Oh, yeah, the Randonauts. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, see, that's great. That's perfect for Tim to be messing with.
Yep. And he said, yeah, Randonautica is the name of the app.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that one from everything that they share and the community that is kind of working with it, it's awesome because it's so fresh, and like a lot of people are just coming onto it totally from outside of all this stuff, and they're having these experiences with it, and then so folks who actually are kind of have already dipped their toes into these waters to utilize the app and to have those experiences, it seems like it just kicks it up a notch.
And I haven't tried it yet, but I plan on playing around with it.
Yeah, it's and that's one of the things, we have so many tools available to us, and we have so much material out there to work with, instead of waiting for the revelation, jumping in and kind of playing with it and doing it, Because like the Psi app that Targ designed, that was what they were doing. It was a NASA device before it was a smartphone app. So it's not like you're I don't know. It's interesting, the provenance of some of the stuff that's available now, just sort of open source and whatever. It's the same kind of stuff that they were using in the labs early on,
Well,
so.
Did you know that Michael Persinger's, they had some equipment designs where you can actually go on YouTube and see how to build the equipment that facilitates psi between individuals so that you can do your own experiments.
Oh, really? They've got that is it one of the, like, the helmet kind of things?
I don't think it's like a god helmet. I think it's more like the octopus type thing.
Okay.
That they used with Ingo Swann to turn on and off his psi. I think it's based on that. So it's a very simplified version, and they have schematics of how to wire the thing up if you've got like some basic electronics understanding. You can build these devices and do your own experiments. They've got all the plans. It's all open source material.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the future of this stuff really doesn't lie in the hands of scientists, because too few of them are willing to take chances on it.
I think it's both. Like, the scientists that do good work, and it kind of pushes things forward, and they also have more funds. Even when the funding is limited, it's a lot of times more than an individual would be able to, pull up. But the whole thing, I think one of the interesting things about this is that it's so intimate, and it is so tied to the human experience that anybody with an aptitude can go out and start to do the work itself, and then science comes in on the side or around it, parallel to it,
Well, I think if enough people have these experiences, then as time moves on, those people who have experiences will also be the scientists.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And being able to recognize the experiences you're already having, like Cherylee was talking about with the journal, Yeah.
Well, Charles Tart had done originally that taste that was transcendental or transcendent experiences. It was basically where scientists could record experiences.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And a lot of them had done so anonymously because they didn't have tenure.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
But, there was other scientists who did use their names, but just to have a repository of those stories of experiences specifically by academic scientists so that people could look at that and go, well, they're having those experiences, so maybe it's okay.
Yeah, and that's something that Jeff Kripal has been working on a whole bunch lately, which is the concept of authorization. And we saw that with the New York Times thing with the UFOs was an example of authorization for the subject to be able to be brought out and talked about in a more public way that wasn't, just kind of on the sidelines. And, with the psychic functioning and that, the Flip, which is one of the recent books that Kripal wrote, it's all about that. Scientists that have had experiences, or, he goes into Mark Twain's psychic experiences, because Mark Twain was super into psychical research. And, kind of drawing out the fact, or Carey Mullis, right? Like, he is a Nobel Prize winner that had some pretty wild experiences that go like far beyond what most people would admit in public, including a glowing green raccoon. That talked to him, and stuff like that. So, and Willie Strieber has recently had some folks on his podcast who are professional scientists that have had extreme experiences that again go beyond what most people would admit in public to having had. One guy worked for NASA and did some of the planning for space launches and that, and kind of drawing that out. And it's kind of always been a goal, with Eslin and the Institute of Noetic Science, and groups like that to kind of bring that in. But now there's a much more concerted effort to bring that conversation forward, in the public with people who can culturally authorize these experiences,
Mm.
Is that why the skeptics aren't as noisy lately?
Yeah, I mean they've been smacked around with the UFO thing, the psi stuff. They just don't have a leg to stand. It's so prevalent, and things like the randonauts. It's starting to just kind of appear in culture where people are having these experiences and nobody's buying it. Plus, there's kind of a generational thing where I think a lot of the skeptics are kind of drifting off, and they sound like idiots now. There was Diana Pasulka was recently on Shermer's show, and Michael Shermer sounded completely ignorant. I mean, he just sounded she was super nuanced, very open, very, about her research with high-level experiencers, culturally, high level. And Shermer just sounded dumb. And I think that because they don't read the stuff, they don't talk to people. They're rude, they're arrogant. And I think that with social media and that, like, people just don't buy it anymore,
Well, they've already made up their minds. They know the answers.
Yeah. And they just sound crude in terms of some of the people that are now talking about this stuff publicly.
True.
They sound like jerks. So, the skeptical subculture is still there. But, and I think, it's just the information's available too. So when there's like, this never happened, or a Nobel Prize winner never did this or whatever, you can go on the internet and Google it and be like, oh wait, yeah, they did. Like, you are just totally lying right there. You just literally lied.
No, wait, would a skeptic do that? I mean, they're all about truth and science.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, and that's the funny thing too, is it's the stuff like that where they're like, scientists don't look at this, and you're like, wait, Mick West is a good example. He's a computer game designer. He's talking about, like, well, these people who saw this, the military people don't know how to read their own radar. You're a computer game designer, dude. Like, you don't know how to read radar. Like, that was a seagull. That was the afterburner on a jet. Like, how do you know? You design computer game.
Right.
Did for physics or anything like that, But at the same time, I'm not making claims on physics. And right. And I think that really shows when you have, people, and social media has connected everybody so much that, for every skeptic that can come forward way outside their lane and make these bold claims, there's someone else that has equal authority and culture that comes forward and demonstrates that that's absolutely not true.
All right. Where can people find you, David?
davidmetcalfe.wordpress.com or David B. Metcalfe on Twitter and Liminal Analytics on Instagram.
All right. Perfect. Well, thank you both for having this conversation here.
Yeah, thanks for hosting.
Yes, thank you.
I want to take a moment here and thank all my patrons. Without you, this show may not be a thing. And I'm going to give a shout out to those pledging $10 or more. Super Inframan, Allison Cook, Lindsay Trebet, Tim, Big Boy Limina, Craig Parmenter, Walker, Joanna Rojas, Maddie, David Moore, Vincent Treewell, The Great Change, Stone Wilderness, Luke Osborne, Becky Trainer, Chris Barr, Rob Drummond, Alex Whitcomb, Edu Camahort, Tactical Therapist, Janet Bunderson, 36 Dingo, Sam Sharon, Jennifer Campbell, American Rambler, Kevin, Will Powell, John Rutledge Foster, Eric Citron, Andy McNamara, Sasha Jorg, Matthias Sunby, Dominic O'Malley, Christopher Vaughn, Riker and Stark, J. Otto Bullitt, Jose A., Roger Gonzalez, Craig Cisternos, Ray Benedetto, Lindsey Jackson K., Alfred Tuttle, Matthew Sproul, Kevin Schreck, Patricia Gaia-Quinta, William Lovelace, Mark Brady, Chris 646, Carla Mahoney, and James Lattimore. Thank you all so Very, very much. All right, we have a little bit of time left, and what I'm going to air now is something that aired originally on The Last Exit for the Lost. These are a couple of personal stories. When I had High Council on co-hosting the show with me last month or so, I ended up asking them what's the weirdest thing that's ever happened to you. And Lou gave me a couple of ghost stories that were pretty cool. And then Steve gave us a completely different story. Not quite paranormal, but still somewhat interesting. So I kind of clipped them out of that show with the intent of putting this on a listener story show at some point. And I think this is a good a place of any to put them. And so again, this is two of the members of a band called High Council out of New Jersey. And it was recorded on my music show, The Last Exit for the Lost. Also, if you're a fan of Lyle Blackburn just co-hosted an episode of Last Exit for the Lost with me, talking about his musical history from Solitude Aeternus to his current band Ghoultown and horror movies and all kinds of stuff. And you can find that on thelastexit.org. If you check out our Mixcloud, the link is up there. It's, I think, just mixcloud.com/Ascath. There's also links on Where the Road Goes, a Facebook page, Facebook group, stuff like that. I posted it a few times. So if you're interested in hearing that, go check that out. It's a really interesting conversation with Lyle. But anyway, here are the two stories from Lou and Steve of High Council.
I mean, I want to go ghost story right now, I think.
Definitely.
We, in my late teens and early 20s, we, I don't know if you're familiar with Weird New Jersey.
Yes.
Yeah, that magazine. So we were sort of coming into our early 20s just as that was getting popular. So we would, drive around, the woods and of the Pine Barrens, and we would just go try to find all these places. And one of the most sort of like well-known and well-tread haunted spot, if you believe it, in South Jersey is called the Atco Ghost. Yeah. Which story apparently goes that, a little boy was playing basketball on the side of this like very creepy road, like right outside the entrance to, either a state park or the Pine Barrens or something like that. And he got hit by a car and killed in a hit and run. And they say that if you park a certain distance away, and depending on who you talk to, either flash the lights 3 times or honk the horn 3 times, and look into the shadows, you'll see it. So this is something we used to do like every night. We hadn't started drinking yet, so we're like, let's go to the Atco Ghost. Whatever. So we would head down there, and I never saw anything. People would be like, look in the shadows, you can see them move. I'm like, man, I don't see anything down there. You're all tripping. So one time we went with a friend of mine from college and her boyfriend, and myself and Bob was there too, and maybe someone else. I don't recall. But I was out of the car explaining this, what you're supposed to do to my friend from school. And then her boyfriend's in the back. He's got his video camera. And suddenly, like, his video camera just powers off. It goes from full battery to nothing. He's like, oh, this is weird. My camera stopped working. And then all of a sudden, we heard what sounded like a basketball being thrown at us. And we looked around. We didn't see anything. And I thought I was crazy. So I looked at Bob, who is one of the most pragmatic, down-to-earth dudes you can ever meet. And he's like, let's get out of here, man. So we just ran. And I don't know why we did that, because it was cool. It was one of the only times I'd ever actually experienced anything that was even passably supernatural, and we ran away from it. But yeah, so that was one of the weirder things that has happened to me.
Okay. We were just talking about paranormal stuff, and you have another ghost story, Lou.
I do. So I don't know. Are you familiar with New Hope, Pennsylvania?
Name rings a bell.
So New Hope is one of, a bunch of cities or towns in PA that are rumored to be pretty haunted. And
it's also, even if you aren't there for the haunting, it's a really cool town. Like I like New Hope a lot. They got like little canals and old buildings and stuff, and it's like it's built up in a neat way.
Nice.
Yeah. Have you ever been to Woodstock?
No.
Okay. Well, if you've been, that's like kind of the New York equivalent, I guess. It's very similar.
Okay.
But yeah, so besides being like, nice, cool, and scenic and historic, it's supposedly very haunted. And part of that is there's a bridge there that they used to hang horse thieves from. And I'd had friends who would go and swear they, heard like horses like, clopping underneath, or, seen strange things. And one of my friends said he got pushed, and these guys are always saying stuff like that. So I was like, well, I got to go check this stuff out too. So a group of us went up there in a car, and we're just sort of driving around New Hope at night. And there's sort of like the downtown area, which is pretty cool. And then it gets, out to the area where all these covered bridges are, and, a lot of lakes and streams, and just like super creepy woods. So we were driving past, and a friend of mine, Jimmy, who actually did the artwork for Time Served and Held in Contempt, he was in the car, and we were just riding by this parking lot that was sort of in this break between two sets of woods. And he was like, I just saw like a man-shaped sort of column of smoke, like walking around that parking lot. And I'm like, boo, you're tripping. So he's like, no, let's go back. Let's turn around. So we turned back around, and I got like the faintest glimpse of this, because we pull into the parking lot, and everyone else in the car saw it. And like, I turned around to see it. And just as I turn around, everyone's like, oh my God, it's right there. It's like just this man-shaped column of smoke approaches the car. As soon as I turn my head, it like dissipates. So all I really see is kind of like a patch of fog. And Jimmy's got his camera out. He's like snapping pictures like crazy, trying to get it. And I'm like, everyone else in the car is like, oh my God, you see that? Like, yeah, that was so cool. That was so crazy. And I turn around, and I'm just like, it's coming back up at the car again. And I see this like cloud of smoke, like coming up along the back window. And Jimmy's like, that's the exhaust. And I was like, damn it, I missed it. So that was my my close encounter.
Nice.
The last time I was in a group of people that like were looking at or for supernatural things, and this is like kind of like a longer story arc, but I in 2011 I went to China to train at a Taoist monastery with Kung Fu, right? Like you do. Yeah. And I, like the basics thing is like, they had like a lot of foreign students there to like help, you pay for room and board and lessons and stuff, and that helps them rebuild the temple. And, I have like a whole Facebook page about it that like gets like a little travel blog kind of thing. But like the basic gist of it is like you exercise for like 5 or 6 hours a day, 6 days a week, and then you have like a day off. And like for our day off, we went hiking in the mountains, like me and this guy from Seattle and this other guy from California and this lady from Japan. We kind of just like made like a group of like 4 people that went up the mountains and like, tried to see what we could see. Because there's all kinds of cool, like, old ruins and stuff. Yeah. And like, the guy who was from Washington, Damien, was basically saying like, he was basically like, who'd been there before us. He'd been there at the place training for a while longer than we had. And he kind of already knew the lay of the land, and he knew like, where to go and had some ideas. And it was really funny. Like, he's like, okay, so like, oh, if you climb the mountain high enough, there's a place where you can just like there's like a cave you can sleep in. And the idea was like the 4 of us were going to, get some stuff, get some things we could sleep on, and like just carry them up the mountain, like, with some food. And, we could eventually like reach this like area and sleep. I'm like, okay, cool. And so like, like for your day off, like from all this like horrible, exhausting exercise, like you're gonna just like climb a mountain. So like it was terrible. So like, like we go and do this and we do okay. We hike for like 12 hours or something. And we get to like this area close to Xinting, which is the golden summit of the highest mountain for the range where the temples are. And like, we're there at night, and like the cave situation is not quite a cave. It's more of just like a small like nook like the size of a closet or like four people can't sleep in here. What are you doing? What are you talking about? And
right.
like it's and like if you're like in the closet space where this like thing the cave is, like basically in front of you is enough of a cliff that you could like imagine like the size of like a nice office desk, and that's about the size of the cliff in front of the cave. So it's basically like 3 feet from you to the edge of the where the stone drops off, and like maybe like 8 feet long or something. And we're like, all right, so like one person can sleep here holding their backpack and praying they don't roll. And like what's going on with the other 3 people? So whatever. We're like we're sitting on this not quite place to sleep, and like we're looking over the mountains in the middle of the mountainous part of China in Hebei province. And like this is the Wudang mountain range, which the Wu-Tang Clan got their name from. So okay. It's like, yeah, it's I don't know, like I don't tell this story a whole lot, but it's absolutely interesting. I swear to God, follow me on Facebook, tell your friends, whatever. But like, but Damien's like, looking out, and we're all looking at the mountain range, and like, we're kind of like in this place where, it's definitely got like, buildings that are, stone buildings that are like 900 years old, and there's all this like the natural allure and mysticism of going to China and doing kung fu and learning these things. And like he's saying like if you look at the mountains, there's like lights on the mountains that like do like weird things. And he's saying the way he thinks about it, there's like dragons in the mountains. And I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, okay. So right. That's fine. And like we definitely like sit there and just stare out, like like sitting on the cliff and like looking out, and we're just completely dehydrated and exhausted, and like all those things. And like you do see like lights moving around and like darting. We're like, I'm not sure if they're from cars or they're from like like sometimes like they say like if you're looking at like UFOs, maybe it's like a car with its headlamps pointed up a hill or floating off low clouds or something. Like there's all kinds of stuff it could be. But I'm like, all right, this is great. I'm just gonna like I just need to sleep. Like, I don't want to be that guy, but like I'm gonna call the closet and like y'all can like leave me alone. And like I don't know. I feel like in that moment, like there's someone who like really was open-minded to it, and I was just too tired at that point. And I wonder like if I just have become too tired as a man to be open-minded to the spiritual world, and now they just kind of all ignore me.
That was your moment. That was like, we're here for you. We're right here. And you're like, if it's cool with you guys, I'm going to take the rock.
Yeah, where's your Facebook page on this?
Oh, it's easy. It's a Facebook page called Crouching Tiger, Hidden Steve. Yeah, and that's basically just like it's like my little travel blog of being like a guy that finished college and like wanted to do something instead of like going to find a job right away. And I was lucky enough to have some money to do it at the time. So I was like I could take the sudden money that I had come into and be responsible and like pay off my car or be smart or pay off my student loans, or I could like go on an adventure before I had too many responsibilities. And so it's basically just like me going abroad and doing the things. And it's all there on the Facebook page, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Steve.
All right. I hope that was an interesting extra for everyone. Really like that band. I really like those guys. They're cool people. And Again, they're based out of Philly, New Jersey area, High Count. So we're going to hear a song from them to end things off. But also, I just want to thank everyone who has helped me out with my new flood problem. I've been able to get some of the stuff taken care of, thanks in part to the donations made by you listeners and Patreons, and I really appreciate it. You guys are lifesavers. Yeah. And I'll see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.